Admissions over 5 weeks is a limited sample from which to draw broad conclusions, and resettlement numbers often pick up later in the fiscal year, which began in October. But the sharp drop has alarmed refugee advocates. They're pretty much shutting the refugee program down without having to say that's what they're doing, said Eric Schwartz, president of Refugees International. They've gotten better at using bureaucratic methods and national security arguments to achieve nefarious and unjustifiable objectives. Trump administration officials say the temporary ban on refugees, and the new security procedures that followed, serve to protect Americans from potential terrorist attacks. Supporters of the administration's move also argue that the refugee program needed reform and that making it more stringent will ultimately strengthen it. The program needed to be tightened up, said Joshua Meservey, a senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, who formerly worked in refugee resettlement in Africa. I'm all for strengthening the vetting, cracking down on the fraud, being really intentional on who we select for this, because I think it protects the program ultimately when we do that. A State Department official attributed the drop in refugee admissions to increased vetting, reviews aimed at identifying potential threats, and a smaller annual refugee quota this year of 45,000, the lowest level in decades. The White House did not respond to a request for comment. New rules, more info for each of the last 3 years. Refugees from the 11 countries made up more than 40% of U.S. admissions. While 9 of the 11 countries are majority Muslim, it is often their religious minorities, including Christians and Jews, who seek asylum in the United States. And in practice, of the 11 countries only Iran, Iraq, Somalia, South Sudan, and Syria produce refugees who resettle in the United States in meaningful numbers. Trump administration officials have said the 90-day review does not amount to a bar on refugees from the 11 countries. But just as the review launched, the number of refugees coming from those countries ceased almost entirely. From all countries, 1,469 refugees were admitted to the United States in the 5 weeks between October 25 and November 28, according to the State Department data. That was 41% lower than during the final 5 weeks of the ban, when nearly 2,500 refugees gained entry. Just 9% of refugees admitted to the United States between October 25 and November 28 were Muslim, and 63% were Christian. In the 5 weeks prior, 26% were Muslim and 55% were Christian. More refugees were allowed in during the period the temporary refugee ban was in place because the Supreme Court, in okaying the ban in June, required refugees with bona fide ties to the United States be exempted. The new rules have been challenged in court, but no rulings have yet been issued. Each twist in U.S. refugee policy has left Ali Reza, a gay Iranian refugee living in Turkey, confused, desperate for information, and less hopeful he will ever make it to the United States. When Trump's ban was initially blocked by federal courts, Ali Reza was able to continue the vetting process and was close to the point of being resettled. Then came the Supreme Court ruling reinstating the ban, and then the new restrictions replacing the ban. As a refugee from one of the 11 countries targeted for additional scrutiny, he is once again in limbo. Ali Reza questions the national security logic of the new review. He and his boyfriend of 13 years fled to Turkey in 2014 after facing harassment, beatings, and extortion in Iran. Human rights groups say that discriminatory laws in Iran against sexual minorities put them at risk of harassment and violence. "We ourselves have been hurt by the Islamist system in Iran," he said in a recent telephone interview from Eskişehir, in northwestern Turkey. "Why would we suffer for 3 years, in Turkey, so that we could come to America and commit terrorism?"